On the night of June 1st, 1997, a black Chevrolet sat at a red light in Compton after leaving a Death Row Records gathering at Gonzales Park. Behind the wheel was Heron Palmer, one of Suge Knight's most trusted associates, a man whose face was familiar throughout Death Row's inner circle. Then a van pulled alongside and two gunmen stepped out. Before Palmer could drive away, bullets ripped through the vehicle, leaving him slumped inside his seat while the shooters disappeared into the night. Detectives immediately understood this was not a random hit, since nobody had ever gone after Suge Knight's camp so openly before. That was Aaron Palmer on the night it started. But before that red light turned into a murder scene, the story looked very different. Long before Aaron Palmer's name became attached to an unsolved homicide, Death Row Records had already grown into something far larger than a music company, which explains why his murder carried so much weight across Los Angeles. Marion Suge Knight built the label alongside Dr. Dre during the early 1990s, transforming Death Row into the dominant force in West Coast rap through albums that reshaped the industry while generating enormous money and influence. As profits increased, Knight surrounded himself with trusted people from Compton neighborhoods, creating an organization where music business executives often stood shoulder to shoulder with street figures. That arrangement helped Death Row project strength across California, although it also brought long-standing neighborhood politics into a company that was becoming one of the most recognizable brands in entertainment. As Death Row expanded, several names started appearing repeatedly around Suge Knight's circle, which gradually connected business operations with street loyalties throughout Compton. Heron Palmer became one of Knight's most dependable bodyguards, earning trust through loyalty while accompanying him during important events and high-profile appearances. Alden Buntry McDonald handled production responsibilities while maintaining close ties to Mob Piru members, who formed the backbone of Knight's support system. Nearby stood James McDonald, Buntry's older brother, while Roger Neckbone Williams built a reputation as another respected figure within that same network. Wardell Poochie Faust carried an even more feared reputation around Compton streets, whereas Trevon Lane operated within the Death Row orbit closely enough to receive personal recognition from Suge himself. Those relationships mattered since Death Row never functioned like a traditional record label, which meant loyalty often carried value equal to business experience. Knight recruited heavily from the Mob Piru Bloods, giving many members employment, access, status, and protection under a growing corporate umbrella. At the same time, he also brought in people connected to Fruittown Piru and Looters Park Piru, creating a situation where individuals from different blood factions worked within the same environment. Although those groups shared common affiliations, old neighborhood rivalries never disappeared completely, leaving tension beneath the surface even when money kept everybody focused on larger opportunities. Most outsiders never noticed those fault lines, yet several future conflicts were already taking shape inside that arrangement. While those pressures quietly developed, another event unfolded during the summer of 1996 that would later echo through several connected stories. Trevon Lane was visiting the Lakewood Mall when Orlando Anderson, a member of the Southside Compton Crips, allegedly participated in taking a Death Row chain from him during a confrontation. Losing that chain represented far more than losing jewelry, since Death Row medallions symbolized status, loyalty, and public respect within the culture surrounding the label. News of the incident spread through Knight's circle quickly, creating resentment among people who already viewed Anderson and his associates as enemies. What started as a robbery soon became personal for several men whose paths would cross again under much more dangerous circumstances. That opportunity arrived on September 7, 1996, when Mike Tyson fought Bruce Seldon at the MGM Grand in Las Vegas, bringing together a large death row entourage for one of boxing's biggest nights. Suge Knight attended alongside Tupac Shakur, Aaron Palmer, Alton McDonald, Trevon Lane, Roger Williams, and numerous others connected to the label. After the fight ended, Lane spotted Orlando Anderson inside the MGM Grand, which immediately revived memories of the stolen chain from Lakewood Mall. The encounter escalated rapidly once Tupac confronted Anderson, leading several death row associates to join the altercation as punches and kicks landed in full view of casino security. By the time the fight ended, emotions were running high throughout both groups, although nobody fully understood how much larger the consequences would become. Hours later, Tupac rode through Las Vegas with Suge Knight when gunfire erupted from another vehicle, leaving the rapper critically wounded during one of hip-hop's most infamous shootings. His death 6 days later sent shockwaves across the music world, yet the damage extended far beyond entertainment headlines because death row immediately entered a period of instability. Suge Knight soon received a prison sentence tied to probation violations connected to the MGM incident, removing the central figure who had kept many competing personalities aligned. Without Knight's daily presence, uncertainty began spreading throughout death row, while several powerful figures attempted to adjust to a changing landscape. As those changes unfolded publicly, somebody within the same blood world appeared to be carrying private grudges that had not been forgotten, setting the stage for events that would eventually circle back to Aaron Palmer's final drive through Compton. While death row struggled to stay together after Tupac Shakur's death and Suge Knight's imprisonment, another story was developing inside Compton that most people around the label barely noticed. George Williams, a Fruittown Piru member who had worked security around death row operations, suddenly found himself pushed outside the organization after a dispute involving vehicles that belonged to the company. What might have looked like a workplace disagreement carried a different weight in that world, especially when respect, reputation, and neighborhood politics often mattered more than contracts or job titles. As Williams drifted away from the death row orbit, the situation became even uglier when stories surfaced claiming that associates connected to the label tried to grab him and send a message. Instead of ending the conflict, the attempt left Williams wounded but alive, which meant the problem had not disappeared and had actually become much more personal. That failed effort changed the direction of several lives, since Williams walked away carrying more than physical injuries, while also carrying a grudge that people around Compton later described as permanent. As months passed, he began spending time with Roderick Lil Rod Reed, a respected Fruittown Piru figure whose influence extended beyond ordinary neighborhood activity. Reed had a growing reputation throughout Compton, partly through street connections and partly through business ventures that generated substantial money. Unlike many gang members who stayed tied to one block, Reed moved through different circles and maintained relationships with people capable of providing resources, protection, or opportunities. Once Williams linked up with him, the combination created concern among those familiar with both men, since each already possessed reasons to dislike members of the mob Piru network surrounding Suge Knight. Around the same period, Heron Palmer remained one of the most trusted names, which made him visible wherever Suge Knight's people gathered. Palmer had traveled with Knight during major moments, stood alongside important figures, and earned respect from people who viewed loyalty as currency. Men like Alton Buntry, McDonald, Roger Neckbone, Williams, Wardell Poochie, Faust, Mob James, and Trevon Lane all operated within overlapping circles where Palmer's presence carried significance. That visibility helped strengthen his standing, yet it also made him a symbol of the organization that some rivals blame for old disputes. As George Williams and Lil Rod Reed built their alliance, several names represented the death row machine, though Palmer happened to be among the most recognizable. That reality brought everything back to June 1st, 1997, when Palmer left the Gonzales Park gathering and headed into the Compton night without knowing he was entering an ambush. Investigators later focused on how efficiently the attack unfolded, noting that the shooters appeared familiar with Palmer's movements rather than acting on chance. The van stopped, two gunmen emerged, multiple rounds struck the vehicle, then the attackers disappeared before police could react. Bobby Ladd from the Compton gang unit later described the killing as something that immediately stood apart from ordinary street violence, largely because nobody had previously targeted a member of Suge Knight's inner circle so openly. That observation fueled speculation throughout the city, where many people interpreted the attack as a warning directed beyond Palmer himself. As detectives searched for answers, attention naturally shifted toward individuals who possessed both motive and existing friction with death row figures, which repeatedly brought discussions back toward George Williams and Roderick Reed. Neither man faced charges connected to Palmer's homicide, yet their names continued circulating through conversations involving the case. Those rumors gained traction partly because Williams had survived the earlier conflict involving death row associates, while Reed maintained growing influence within Fruittown Piru circles. At the same time, officers struggled to secure witness cooperation, leaving investigators with suspicions but few opportunities to build prosecutable cases. The lack of arrests only deepened uncertainty, creating an atmosphere where theories multiplied faster than confirmed facts. Meanwhile, fear quietly spread through death row's remaining inner circle as people started recognizing that Palmer's murder might not be an isolated event. Men who once moved comfortably through Compton began paying closer attention to vehicles behind them, unfamiliar faces nearby, and rumors moving through neighborhood streets. Poochie Faust carried his own reputation as an enforcer. Buntry McDonald remained close to Suge Knight, while Mob James watched longtime associates navigate increasingly dangerous circumstances. Roger Neckbone Williams and Trevon Lane also understood that Palmer's death represented more than the loss of one individual, since whoever ordered the hit had demonstrated unusual confidence. That realization created a question hanging over Compton, which nobody could answer with certainty. If somebody could reach Aaron Palmer, who would be next? For a while, Palmer's killing looked like a single score settled between rival factions operating inside the same blood world, yet the calm that followed turned out to be deceptive. New alliances continued forming. Old grudges stayed alive, and unresolved anger kept moving beneath the surface while death row struggled through one crisis after another. The names George Williams and Roderick Lil Rod Reed appeared more frequently in conversations connected to emerging conflicts, even though many allegations remained impossible to prove. What nobody realized during those months was that Aaron Palmer's death had only opened the door to a much larger cycle of retaliation. Before long, more shootings, more funerals, and more familiar faces connected to death row would begin appearing in the same story. If Aaron Palmer's murder planted fear inside death row's orbit. The next few years showed that the shooting had been part of something much larger developing across Compton. By April 2000, violence returned in a way that immediately grabbed attention when William Chin Walker was sitting inside a van on a dead-end street alongside Wardell Poochie Faust. Gunmen suddenly opened fire on the vehicle, killing Walker while leaving Faust wounded but alive, which instantly transformed him from a grieving friend into a man looking for answers. News of the attack traveled quickly through mob Piru circles, largely because Walker's death came after years of growing hostility involving many of the same names already connected to earlier conflicts. As people debated who was responsible, the surviving passenger became the more important figure since Poochie carried enough influence to turn anger into action. That influence had been building for years, making Wardell Poochie Faust one of the most feared names attached to Suge Knight's camp. Raised around Bradfield Avenue in Compton, Faust had developed a reputation that stretched far beyond ordinary neighborhood politics, while stories about his past followed him almost everywhere he went. His closeness to Suge Knight made him valuable inside mob Piru circles, though it also placed a target on his back whenever tensions rose. At the same time, his name surfaced repeatedly in conversations surrounding the still unsolved murder of Christopher the Notorious B.I.G. Wallace, which only added to the mythology surrounding him. Whether people believed every rumor hardly mattered, since his reputation alone carried enough weight to make enemies cautious whenever he entered a room. While Poochie was recovering from the Walker shooting, another figure moved through the same complicated world while maintaining connections across multiple factions. Vince V. Buchanan was not known primarily as a shooter or an enforcer, which made his role more unusual within the growing conflict. He drove expensive vehicles, invested in businesses, displayed jewelry, and maintained relationships with people from different blood sets who often distrusted one another. Buchanan knew individuals connected to death row, maintained ties to Fruittown Piru members, and moved comfortably between groups that increasingly viewed each other with suspicion. That position made him influential, though it also meant he possessed information and relationships that could become dangerous once loyalties started shifting. Only weeks after Walker's death, Buchanan disappeared under circumstances that sounded more like something from a kidnapping operation than a typical street retaliation. Men reportedly posing as police officers detained him, placed him in handcuffs, and transported him away from public view before anyone could intervene. When his body eventually surfaced near a cemetery in Compton, the details shocked even people accustomed to gang violence, since reports described extreme torture before his death. Stories immediately spread, claiming the execution had been recorded on video, creating one of the most disturbing rumors attached to the entire conflict. Some people blame mob Piru figures seeking revenge for Walker, while others whispered about drug money, business disputes, or hidden betrayals that reached far beyond neighborhood rivalries. The uncertainty surrounding Buchanan's death made the atmosphere even more dangerous, since every theory created a new suspect list. One group claimed he had crossed powerful figures connected to narcotics operations, while another believed his relationships placed him in the middle of conflicts he could no longer control. Certain street conversations pointed toward Roderick Lil Rod Reed, whereas others focused on enemies connected to Suge Knight's side of the dispute. Nobody could agree on the motive, which meant nobody knew where retaliation would land next. That confusion became almost as destructive as the killings themselves, since fear thrives when people stop understanding who is fighting whom. As those rumors spread through Compton, another death pushed the conflict further into chaos. David "Brim Dave" Dudley had built friendships across several blood neighborhoods, allowing him to move between circles that rarely trusted outsiders. His work as a death row promoter connected him to influential figures, while personal relationships linked him to people throughout Mob Piru, Fruittown Piru, and other blood-affiliated groups. On March 25, 2001, Dudley attended a birthday gathering at the home of Alton Buntry McDonald, one of Suge Knight's most loyal associates. Before the night ended, gunfire erupted outside the residence, leaving Dudley dead and adding another name to a rapidly expanding list of casualties. What made Dudley's killing especially unsettling was that almost nobody seemed certain about why he had been targeted. Some people believed he knew too much about Buchanan's fate, while others claimed money disputes had placed him in danger. Additional rumors suggested he had become trapped between rival groups who no longer trusted one another despite years of shared history. Whatever the reason, his death reinforced a growing reality throughout Compton, where longtime friendships suddenly became liabilities instead of protection. Men who had attended parties together, worked together, or represented the same broader blood identity now found themselves questioning everybody around them. By that stage, the conflict had evolved into something far more complicated than revenge for Aaron Palmer alone, since each new murder created fresh motives for another retaliation. Conversations across neighborhoods became filled with stories about videotapes, hidden alliances, stolen money, secret meetings, and shifting loyalties that changed depending on who was telling the story. George Williams remained a recurring name in many discussions, while Roderick "Lil Rod" Reed continued appearing in theories connected to several incidents. Poochie False still wanted answers regarding William Walker, whereas Mob Piru members viewed every new attack as evidence that somebody was systematically dismantling their circle. As the body count climbed higher, one fact became impossible to ignore. The war was no longer targeting random people. While fear spread through Compton, one individual stood above almost everyone else on the list of potential targets, largely because his connection to Suge Knight ran deeper than most. His name was Alton Buntry McDonald, and before long, the violence-consuming death row's world would arrive directly at his doorstep. By 2002, the conflict had moved far beyond the murder of Aaron Palmer, while the names appearing in police files increasingly belonged to people connected directly to Suge Knight's shrinking circle. Among those figures, Alton Buntry McDonald stood near the top of the list due to his long history with death row records and his personal loyalty to Suge Knight. Buntry was not some distant associate who occasionally appeared around the label, since he had been present during several of the most important moments in death row history. He attended the Mike Tyson fight in Las Vegas during September 1996, stood among the entourage surrounding Tupac Shakur, and remained close to Knight long after the company's glory years started fading. As artists departed, lawsuits mounted, and money became harder to find, Buntry stayed in place while many others drifted away. That loyalty made him valuable, though it also made him visible in a war where visibility often became dangerous. On April 3, 2002, Buntry stopped at a gas station in Compton while driving his GMC Denali, apparently handling an ordinary errand that should have taken only a few minutes. As he prepared to pump fuel, two armed men approached and opened fire before he had any realistic chance to react. Multiple bullets struck Buntry in the chest, leaving him mortally wounded, while the attackers escaped before authorities arrived. News of the ambush spread rapidly throughout Compton. largely because people understood exactly who had been hit. Death Row had already lost Aaron Palmer, while other connected figures had already fallen. Yet Buntry's death felt different because he remained one of Suge Knight's closest and most trusted allies. The killing also deepened suspicions that somebody was systematically dismantling the remaining structure surrounding Death Row's old leadership. Detectives publicly linked Buntry's murder to several earlier acts of violence, including incidents involving William Chin Walker and David Brim Dave Dudley. Street conversations quickly returned to familiar names like George Williams and Roderick Lil Rod Reed, even though neither man faced murder charges connected to those cases. What mattered inside neighborhoods was the growing pattern rather than courtroom outcomes, since another high-profile mob Piru figure had just been buried. As Buntry's family mourned, his brother Mob James found himself watching another longtime friend disappear from a circle that was becoming smaller every year. Only 6 months later, another death struck even deeper into Death Row's cultural identity. Henry "Hen Dog" Smith was not known primarily as an enforcer or bodyguard, which made his importance different from many others already mentioned in this story. Smith designed the iconic Death Row Records logo that appeared on albums, merchandise, promotional material, and countless images associated with the label's rise. He maintained ties to Mob Piru while also carrying influence through his creative work, making him one of the few people whose contributions extended beyond neighborhood politics. Even individuals unfamiliar with Compton streets had seen something he created, which meant his connection to Death Row reached far beyond California. On October 16, 2002, Smith was sitting inside his vehicle in the Vermont Vista area of Los Angeles while his girlfriend used a nearby payphone. Her child remained nearby as the afternoon appeared completely routine until a gunman approached on foot and opened fire through the window. Several rounds struck Smith before the shooter escaped on a bicycle, leaving witnesses shocked by both the timing and the brazenness of the attack. Investigators later explored possible links to the Denver Lane Bloods, suggesting the violence had expanded beyond the original Mob Piru and Fruitown Piru conflict. That possibility worried many observers, since it suggested additional factions were becoming involved in a feud that already seemed impossible to control. The response from Mob Piru members showed how quickly grief could become retaliation during those years. Timothy "Tim Rue" McDonald, Buntry's younger brother, joined the Daryl Biggie Small in what authorities described as an attempted get-back mission aimed at rivals connected to the growing conflict. The pair drove into hostile territory carrying a firearm while searching for an opportunity to strike back. Before anybody could be shot, police officers spotted suspicious activity and intervened, leading to arrests that prevented another funeral from being added to the list. That moment highlighted a changing reality across Compton, where law enforcement increasingly intercepted retaliatory plans before street justice could unfold. As arrests began replacing revenge missions, Death Row itself continued falling apart from the inside. Dr. Dre had already moved on, Snoop Dogg was gone, Tupac had been dead for years, and the label's dominance no longer existed outside old memories. Suge Knight returned from prison to an environment where trusted allies were disappearing, financial troubles were multiplying, and influence no longer carried the same weight. Fear slowly replaced the confidence that once surrounded the organization, while surviving associates became cautious about where they traveled and whom they trusted. Every new killing reinforced the feeling that somebody was still keeping score. Yet, even after Aaron Palmer, Buntry McDonald, Henry Smith, William Walker, Vince Buchanan, and David Dudley became part of the growing casualty list, one name continued to stand above the rest. Wardell Poochie Faust remained alive, remained feared, and remained closely connected to Suge Knight despite years of violence surrounding him. Many people viewed him as the strongest soldier still standing inside Mob Piru's corner of the conflict. Unfortunately for Poochie, the war was not finished, and the next chapter would place him directly in the crosshairs. By the summer of 2003, Wardell Poochie Faust had outlived several men who once stood beside him inside death row's world, though survival did not mean safety in a conflict that had already claimed Aaron Palmer, Alton McDonald, Henry Smith, William Walker, and others. On July 24, 2003, only days after his 43rd birthday, Faust was riding his motorcycle through Compton when gunfire suddenly erupted from a nearby vehicle. Multiple rounds tore into his back, sending one of Mob Piru's most feared figures crashing onto the street before help could reach him. The killing immediately carried significance beyond another body in a long-running feud, largely because Poochie represented one of the last remaining links to Suge Knight's. For many people watching from the sidelines, his death felt like the closing act of a chapter that had started years earlier with Aaron Palmer's murder. Part of that attention came from the stories attached to Poochie's name long before his assassination. He had spent years close to Suge Knight, operating inside circles where loyalty, violence, and reputation often overlapped. His name also appeared repeatedly in discussions surrounding the unsolved murder of Christopher the Notorious B.I.G. Wallace, creating a level of notoriety few others in the conflict possessed. Whether those allegations were true or not, they helped transform Faust into a symbolic figure whose death resonated far beyond Compton neighborhoods. Once he was gone, many people began wondering whether the campaign against death row's remaining allies had finally reached its conclusion. While funerals continued, federal authorities were building a different kind of case that focused less on murder and more on money. In October 2003, hundreds of officers from multiple agencies launched coordinated raids targeting a massive PCP operation connected to George Williams and Roderick Lil Rod Reed. Investigators uncovered large quantities of drugs, firearms, cash, chemical supplies, and production facilities stretching from Compton into desert communities. The operation revealed an enterprise far larger than most residents realized, showing that key figures tied to the feud had also been involved in highly profitable narcotics activity. Suddenly, the men whose names appeared throughout years of street rumors found themselves facing federal prosecutors instead of neighborhood rivals. Those prosecutions eventually produced convictions for drug manufacturing and distribution, removing Williams, Reed, and several associates from the streets. Yet one detail remained unchanged throughout the legal proceedings, since neither man ever stood trial for Aaron Palmer's murder, Alton McDonald's murder, Wardell Faust's murder, or many other killings linked to the conflict. Investigators continued viewing several deaths as connected, though courtroom proof never materialized strongly enough to resolve the cases. As a result, many of the most important questions surrounding the Bloods versus Bloods war remained unanswered, even after federal sentences were handed down. The violence slowed not through justice, but through imprisonment, death, and the gradual disappearance of key players from the streets.